guys, welcome back to my channel. There's always room for. My name is Kim and today I'm going to teach you how to make a foo style mask which conforms to your face a little bit better than the traditional style masks. Before we get started on the masks, I wanted to share 4 of my favorite tips on how to make these masks a little bit easier for you. The first tip is to batch produce your masks, and that means to make a larger amount of everything at once. The point is that you're doing the same task over and over again at once. So if you're at the cutting board or your desk while you're cutting the fabric, you're sitting there and just cutting fabric for a few hours, like mindlessly. So once I've cut all of the fabric that I need, I go ahead and pair them up and put them right sides together. And then I'll have a big pile of these pairs.
So here's a good example of one of the steps that I'm taking to batch produce these masks. I'm sitting at the sewing machine right now and just sewing the 2 pieces of fabric together in pairs.
And then I'll have a pile of all of these prepared pairs that just go together. And then I can go ahead and just pick the fabrics that I want to go together. So I'll pick a front, a middle, and a back.
Having your fabric cut and sewn in pairs really makes it easier to assemble the masks in the end.
And then I just have to press these and I can pin them together and sew. What I found was that when I was beginning to sew, I was doing everything one at a time. And it took me so much longer to do. But if I'm doing the same thing over and over again, and then just putting it together at the end, it just saves me a lot of time. So that's my first tip, to batch produce your masks. So I have all of these ready to go. This will probably make about 20 masks if I put them all together. Here you go. So for my next tip, it has to do with your pattern. When you print out your paper pattern and you cut it out, you're either pinning it to your fabric and cutting along those lines with scissors, or you're using a rotary cutter and a cutting mat. And so I've been using the cutting mat, and I realized that eventually after cutting a few times, I'm eating away at my pattern. So I traced the pattern out onto cardboard to give it a little bit more of a sturdy body, but with every pass of the rotary cutter, I'm slowly cutting away at my pattern, and eventually you're not working with the same pattern that you started out with. This is how much I've hacked away at my own pattern. So that was just really frustrating for me because I realized that I wasn't cutting the fabric precisely, and that meant that the fabric, when I was putting it together, it wasn't aligning properly. So then I came up with an idea and I asked my best friend Dana to see if she could help. Dana has been my best friend since middle school. She's now an art teacher and she's super creative, and within a few hours she came up with this, and it is a game changer. This is a plastic template for you to use when cutting your fabric, and this is so great because it is a 1/4 inch thick plastic, and you just put it down on your fabric, and then you can use your rotary cutter and cut along the edges of this template without having to worry about chipping away at the edges. What's also great about this is that there's a grid that you can hold on to at different points, and this helps you just get a really good grip on your template when you're cutting.
I really love this template because it's a sturdy guide for my rotary cutter to follow. I can use this over and over again without having to worry about my template changing over time.
This is a great tool to have if you're going to be making more than a handful of masks, because it'll ensure that the cuts of fabric that you make are precise. I'm going to be linking this product below, and it is super special to me because it's the very first product I'm linking on my YouTube page, and it just so happens to be something that I worked on with my best friend. Her Etsy shop is Bright Day Designs Co. I highly recommend that you check out her Instagram account. It's Bright Day Designs. It's full of fun projects for kids. She's an elementary school teacher, and she's just so creative, and if you're stuck at home right now during this quarantine and need something to do with your kids, check it out. So this next tip is not exactly an original idea. It's one that I used when I made a tutu out of tulle, but I think it's great because it'll turn this long piece of elastic into these evenly cut strips of elastic that are ready to be sewn into your masks. So this will cut down your production time.
So prior to me applying this technique to cutting elastic, I would line up the elastic with a ruler and cut, Line it up again and cut over and over.
And that would just take forever. So this should hopefully save you a lot of time.
Take a piece of cardboard from one of those Amazon boxes you got delivered recently and mark off the length you want your elastic to be. In this case, I want my elastic to be 6.5 inches. Cut your cardboard to that size. Tape one end of the elastic to the edge of the correctly measured side of your cardboard. Begin wrapping the elastic around the cardboard, being careful not to pull the elastic too tightly. Secure the elastic to the cardboard using tape. Then cut the elastic along each edge of the cardboard. Remove the tape. And all of your elastic is cut.
So for my fourth and final tip, I've noticed that a lot of sewers have been having issues when finishing off their masks, when they're adding the elastic and sewing off the final edge. They say that when they're sewing, and I found that this was happening to me a lot too, the issue is that when you're folding these edges in so that you get a crisp edge, you're also folding in the fabric that you've sewn together here, so you just have layer upon layer and there's just so much fabric for your sewing machine to get through. And now you're adding elastic on top of that. So now the sewing machine needs to somehow make it through all of those layers. And a lot of times what happens is that the sewing machine starts pushing those layers down into the bottom of the sewing machine, and then it starts eating your mask. So to avoid that, I've come up with a solution. Start further down past the first elastic, you back stitch to the top, and then you stitch all the way down. And what that does is it kind of eases the sewing machine into the amount of fabric that it has to sew.
So here I just let down the presser foot and the needle is past the elastic. I'm sewing down for a few stitches and then back stitching all the way up to the edge of the mask, and then going forward again and stitching straight through.
So those are my 4 tips and tricks for sewing these masks. If you want to go ahead and learn how to make a foo style mask, follow along. I also wanted to take a moment to mention a movement started by a friend, Chris Mendoza. It's called BehindTheMasks.org, and he's putting a public call to all creative minds, asking that we all come together and make 1 million masks to donate to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. BehindTheMasks.org is a great website full of lots of information, including a tutorial. So for those of you that are home making masks and need a place to donate them to, check out BehindTheMasks.org and you'll have all the information that you need.
Cut 6 pieces of fabric for your mask, 2 for each layer. The pieces should mirror each other. The easiest way to do this is to fold your fabric in half and then place your template on top. You can use the printable pattern linked below, the plastic template from Bright Day Designs Co., or any template you like. Place the matching pieces of fabric together, with the right sides facing in. Next, you're going to stitch along the rounded edge. Stitch along the rounded edge of the fabric using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Repeat this for all 3 pairs of fabric. Trim off the top and bottom corners of fabric, as well as any loose threads. Then you'll want to cut about 4 to 5 slits along that rounded edge, going in towards the seam, but being careful not to actually cut through the seam. Repeat this for the remaining pairs. Now I'm placing the fabric over the rounded edge of an ironing board and using my fingers to separate the fabric at the seam. Then I'm taking an iron to press down those edges. The reason we're doing this is because we want the layers of fabric to lay nicely against each other, without any bulk in between them when we sew them together. This results in a neater mask. Repeat this for the remaining layers. Now take your innermost layer, the one that will serve as your filter pocket, and fold the short edge in about 1/4 inch. Fold it over again, and then again one more time, for a total of 3 folds. Press down with an iron, and repeat on the other side. This is the only layer of fabric that needs to be folded in this way. Finish off the folded edges with your sewing machine, sewing a straight line down with a 3/8 inch allowance. Remember to backstitch at the beginning and end of every seam. Repeat this on the other side. Now it's time to align your layers of fabric and pin them in place. This can get a little tricky visually, so I'm linking a blog post below where I go through this process more in depth. The basic principle here is that when you've pinned the pieces together, you only want to see the wrong sides of the fabric, so the seam should be facing you, and all the pretty finished sides should be hidden inside so you can't see them. Next, you want to sew a straight line along the top and bottom edges of the mask, leaving the short sides unsewn. When sewing the bottom side, I think of sewing a stretched out W. I start with the first rounded half, and when I get to the middle, I stop and reposition my fabric, and then continue on with the second rounded half. Cut off loose threads and snip off the 4 sharp corners of your mask. Then you'll want to make a slit in the middle of the bottom of the mask. Think of it as the middle of the W. Be careful not to cut through the seam you just sewed. This helps to prevent the mask from bunching up at the bottom once it's turned inside out. If you want to add a flexible nose, cut a 6-inch piece of wire. Then use needle nose pliers to create loops at the ends of the wire so they aren't sharp. Center the wire over the top edge of the mask. Align the wire with the center of your presser foot. You're going to use a zigzag stitch which will sew to the left and the right of this midpoint, so it's important to keep your wire centered, so the needle doesn't strike the metal wire. Backstitch at the beginning and end of this seam. Now you can turn the mask inside out to reveal the pretty sides of the fabric. Use an iron to press the mask. Take the unfinished edges and fold in about 5/8 of an inch. Do this on both sides and press down with an iron. Insert about a ½ inch of elastic into your mask. Don't forget to switch back to the straight stitch. Start sewing past where the elastic is and use a back stitch all the way to the top of the mask. And then begin to continue sewing a straight line down, stopping halfway to insert the other end of the elastic into the mask. Continue sewing straight down and backstitch back over the elastic. Repeat this on the other end. And this is the completed mask with a pocket for a filter. I like this style of mask the best because it conforms to your face nicely and is easy to put on. The cool thing about this mask is that it's also reversible, since our filter pocket is accessible from both ends.
That's a wrap for today's tutorial. Thank you so much for tuning in and following along. My name is Kim. I will see you guys next time. Bye!